You are listening to TBR Radio Presents The DIXIE Heritage Show, with your host, the Director of DIXIE Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
It never ceases to amaze me who are subscribers to our weekly DIXIE Heritage newsletter. And one of those subscribers who's been with us since the early days is Art Jones from Illinois. Art is in the Chicago area. He's lived there his entire life. He's a Vietnam War veteran. He has Confederate ancestors. And this is his fifth attempt in running for Congress. In the last 4 election cycles, he has received the Republican nomination for his congressional seat in the U.S. Congress there in Chicago. But as you may already know, Chicago is a very heavily Democrat area. And so even though he's been successful cycle after cycle in getting the Republican nomination for the congressional seat, he's been unable to unseat a deeply entrenched incumbent Democrat who he has to challenge each cycle. But currently he is in the Republican primary to seek the nomination for that congressional seat once again. And we are hoping that he gets it. He is our guest on today's show. We're going to start the conversation here on the DIXIE Heritage Show, and we will finish the conversation next week on my other show, TBR Radio Presents, the TBR History Hour. I'd read that you had mentioned having Southern Confederate ancestors.
Yeah, I mean, my dad was born in Alabama. He came from a very large family of 7 brothers and 2 sisters. His mother, well, hell, she died at 106 about 10 years ago. So she'd been around a long time, and my dad's family probably been here probably since they founded the country. And my mother's family, are a bunch of Norwegians and Swedes that came over here in the early 1900s.
Well, you're like me. I can trace my mother's family all the way back. Now I can't, Culpeper, Virginia in the 1600s. But, my dad's family, they were Dutch immigrants, and they didn't get here until about 1898. So I have a lot of Confederate ancestors on my mother's side, and then, of course, none on my father's.
On my father's side, it's a bunch of Rebs.
So I bet with
okay.
So your 106-year-old grandmother, did she ever tell you stories?
Well, she told me. Actually, I was amazed at the thing that she was doing at 105. The last time I seen her, she was sitting in a rocking chair, and she says, Arthur, she said, I think I'm going to make me some soap. She knew how to make soap.
Okay.
They made their own butter. They made the milk. I mean, it was just the first time we were down there. For God's sakes, they didn't even have indoor plumbing, and then they moved up in the world and they got indoor plumbing. But unfortunately, she was still in her old ways, and that's what led her to fall and break her hip. She was, carrying a bucket of milk or fresh churned butter or something there, and boom, she fell and broke her hip, and she never got out of bed after that. But my Aunt Mavis took care of her rather than put her in a nursing home. She said, nothing doing. I'm not putting my mother in no doggone nursing home. So she took care of her until she passed away, But 106, that's pretty doggone good. And my dad, he died at 94. So
longevity.
He was a World War II vet.
Yeah.
And my mother, she was, 87 when she passed on. Yeah, and her mother was like 78. I don't know how long I'm going to be around. I had survived cancer here just past couple of years. They took out my right kidney, had a growth the size of a tennis ball in my right kidney. And I developed a urinary tract infection from that. And that doggone there killed me. That had me on a drug called hydrocone. And before I had the surgery, I was on a waiting list for over a year before they finally got around to operating on me, So I lucked out on that department. Okay, I'm ready to do this show unless we're already doing it.
Okay, well, why don't you start by telling me about your Confederate ancestors? You had mentioned them in a speech and in your bio. Why don't you tell me a little bit about each one of those?
Well, it's what my Aunt Rita, who's passed away, she was like the family historian, okay? But we had enough information from her to establish that we definitely had some members of the Confederate Army in our family. And his father, my dad's father, he served in World War I, And before that, we had relatives in the military service. I come from a very military-oriented family, basically. And my dad was in World War II, and I was in Vietnam, so I don't know what happened in the Korean War. I don't think we had anybody in that war. But we made most of the wars this country has had. And my father's family, according to my Aunt Rita, started out in North Carolina, one of the original colonies. And then they eventually moved their way through the South down into Alabama. And that's where they basically settled. I guess they couldn't go any further to the Gulf of Mexico after that, So I just know that I've seen family photographs of relatives that were in the uniform of the Confederacy. And, so I'm proud to say that, like I said in my bio, I said the blood of the Southern Confederate kept in me, all right? And so that's basically what it is.
So you're in Chicago. What part of Chicago are you in?
I live in a suburb about, I'd say maybe about 10 or 12 miles west of downtown Chicago. It's called Lyons, Lyons, Illinois. To the east of us is Berwyn.
I know where Berwyn is.
To the east of Berwyn is Cicero.
Okay,
now
I know
Cicero used to be a majority white community, but is now about 80% Hispanic. The whites moved out when the Mexicans moved in, and they literally drove the white people out. When I was working for Mutual of Omaha, for example, I had 2 Lithuanian clients, okay, that lived in Cicero, and they just got done paying for their house, this one elderly couple, all right? And next thing you know, the Mexican bought the house next to them, and they came to these elderly Lithuanian couple, and they said, "You will sell us your house." They said, "No, we're going to sell your house. We just paid for it, for God's sake. Now we want to enjoy it." No. We have many relatives in Mexico. You will sell us your house." No, we're not going to sell. Well, they engaged in a terror campaign against this old couple, and finally they reluctantly had to sell their house at a loss, and some young Mexican family moved in, and apparently they've been doing that all over Cicero, and the Cicero Police Department was actually terrorized by this gang of Hispanics that moved in. They were part of this, Latin Kings gang in Chicago, and they just simply took over the town. Right. The cops were absolutely afraid, to go hunting for these characters, and so now you have a situation where the city of Cicero, which was once a Lithuanian, German, Polish, Italian community, is now 80% Hispanic. The white people live in the far south end of the city. But the downtown section there, all up and down Cermak Road, which is the main street there, it's one Mexican business after another, They've driven them out. Had a nice ethnic German restaurant, and that's been taken over. Had a Greek restaurant, that's been taken over. It's just on and on and on, And now they're working on Berwyn, okay? Only Berwyn, the city fathers in Berwyn, they were quite frankly stupid. They advertised, get this, they advertised in Berwyn on the radio that they welcome gays into the community of Berwyn. So the gays started flooding into Berwyn, and the blacks, they decided, well, if you welcome gays, you must love blacks as well. So now you got blacks that moved into Berwyn, okay? And now where I live in Lyons is just right down the street on Ogden Avenue, west of Berwyn. Here we've got basically a white administration, all right? The police department is basically white. The mayor is white. His name is Getty, okay? Christopher Getty, all right? He's white. And, the fire department's white. But we've got some Mexicans that have moved in, and we got some blacks that are living in some tenement buildings, all right? But it's basically still a white community, and the cops, keep an order here. So I have to give them credit for that. But for the city fathers to invite the homosexuals to come in, and they did. They came in, and they've set up businesses in the city there. Just absolutely insanity. So I don't know what's wrong with these so-called political leaders to invite people to come into your community that are queer. I mean, it's just absolutely outrageous.
Right. So I'm going to ask you the crazy question. Does Svengoolie still live in Berwyn?
Svengoolie? You mean the guy that advertised his horror movies?
Yeah, the guy who throws the rubber chickens out of the coffin.
I think he does.
Okay.
I've never met the man. I've seen him on TV, and he shows these old movies from the 1950s and all. And most of them I don't care for, but some of them, the old classics I'll watch. But most of the time I don't give Svengoolie much time at all.
Right. And even down here in Florida where I'm at, Svengoolie's still on television.
How does she know about Svengoolie?
Well, I grew up in Chicago.
Oh, you did? You grew up in Chicago? No kidding.
Yes, sir. And do you know where 142nd and Torrance is?
Yes.
Okay, I grew up on Manistee Street, and so about 3 blocks from there on Manistee.
Do you know about Marquette Park?
Yes, sir.
Well, Marquette Park, we had many, many battles in Marquette Park to keep it white. It was a predominantly a Lithuanian community, but there were some Germans and Poles in there as well. Now it is black. The white people moved out of Marquette Park because of the blacks that kept demonstrating, and we'd hold these rallies against Marquette, say Marquette Park stays white. Well, the Democratic Party, they did everything they could, and the Republican Party as well, cooperating with them to basically destroy any white opposition. There was a phony group that was set up by a woman named Jean Meyer, the Southwest Parish Neighborhood Federation, and they were supposedly the conservative opposition to an organization called the Southwest Community Congress, which was a front group set up by the Communist Party, literally the Communist Party, okay? And they decided that they wanted to integrate Marquette Park. So they kept holding all these demonstrations and everything, and we held rallies against them, all right? It was a coalition of my group, the America First Committee, and we'd hold these rallies, and thousands of people would turn out, But they offered something called the home equity proposal, and that was something that I strongly denounced. I said it would be an absolute disaster for the white people to succumb to this phony Southwest Parish Neighborhood Federation scam. They called for every white resident, every white homeowner, I should say, to pay $75 a year into this fund. And for the next 5 years, they were not to resist any attempt by blacks to move into Marquette Park. And at the end of 5 years, if they decided that they didn't want to live anymore, then they would have this fund and they could get their homes sold at the market value. I said, well, after 5 years of that, I said, your home's not going to be worth a darn. But I would denounce as a racist and a hater and a bigot and all this sort of thing by the so-called conservatives in the Southwest Parish Neighborhood Federation. And unfortunately, the white people fell for the attack, including the Ku Klux Klan. They even endorsed that idea, and I strongly denounced it. And I was the villain in the situation, and it ended up I was absolutely right. Marquette Park now is nothing more than a black hellhole of crime and drugs and violence, and the white people have long since moved out. So that's what happened when you listen to these liberal conservatives. And it turns out that Jean Meyer, when it was all was said and done, turned out that she marched with Martin Luther King for voters' rights in the South. And yet she was promoted by the news media here in Chicago as the conservative opposition to the Southwest Parish and Neighborhood, or to the Southwest Community Congress, okay, which was this Communist Party front. Literally the Communist Party set up this front group, the Southwest Community Congress, headed by Lois Rosen and her daughter and her father, Frank Rosen, okay? And they were head of this Communist Front operation. And they basically moved the blacks in, the whites moved out, and now you got another black den of crime and ignorance and violence in what was once a formerly white ethnic community. So I've come up with a proposal called the Neighborhood Amendment. And what that would do, it would empower the white suburbs where the white people have fled, okay? They would simply have a line in the sand, so to speak. No more than 10% non-white or non-straight or non-Christian in a given neighborhood, okay? They would simply get together with a neighbor and say, do we want this this black group moving in? Do we want this Latinos? Do we want, these homosexuals, whatever the issue is? And once it reaches 10%, that's it. The neighborhood is closed, okay? That would guarantee every neighborhood would remain at least 90% white. And of course, that was denounced by the Republican Party. They said, oh, you can't do that. That's a violation of the 14th Amendment. Nonsense. I mean, the 14th Amendment, so-called equal protection of the laws, apparently those equal protection of the laws don't apply to white people, okay? They just have to suffer in silence while one neighborhood after another is destroyed by this process of integration. And
if you love listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, then I know that you'll love reading the Barnes Review. The Barnes Review is one of my favorite magazines. I began reading the Barnes Review long before they became a sponsor here on the program. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There's just not a more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So if you'll visit www.barnesreview.org, that's www.barnesreview.org, you can find out how you too can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review by mail, or you can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review electronically in PDF editions. Or you can subscribe to receive both. That's what I do. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
And as far as education, here in the city of Chicago, get this, we have 50 foreign languages that are spoken in the Chicago public schools now, okay? English as a second language, but 50 foreign languages. That's destroying the public schools of Chicago. And now the Republican solution to what's going on is to give them vouchers so all the blacks can move to any school they want into the suburbs. And the white taxpayers will be paying for that integration, okay? So they can destroy those public schools as well. So I've been fighting for this, for God's sakes. Well, this is my 5th run for Congress. I've been standing up for white people and their rights to live in their safe, clean, and white, drug-free, gang-free neighborhoods for the past 5 elections. And I get denounced by the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the news media, the radical leftist communists. They mess with my automobiles. My wife's car, for example, they sawed through the tie rods of her car, and the thing broke on Pulaski Avenue, which is a major street in Chicago here, and she almost got smashed into by a semi-trailer truck. So, I mean, these leftist communists are dangerous, all right? And they've targeted me. The FBI actually made a personal visit to my home and said that they had someone in one of these leftist gangs and that they were actually discussing how to assassinate me. So this is what's going on up here in Chicago.
You know, it's funny. A number of years ago now, I was actually had a gentleman who had decided that he wanted to kill me.
Really?
And he's in the federal penitentiary now. Come to find out, he was molesting children and, crossing state lines to do so. But he pastored a church out in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania.
Huh.
And he had at the time what he called a street preachers fellowship. And what he would do is he would get some of these, really just, eager young street preachers in his group there. And he would put them up to do things. In fact, he got one of them to kill an abortion doctor when that happened how many years ago. He was the one who put that guy up to it. He had another street preacher out in Utah who he was setting this guy up to try to assassinate leaders in the Mormon church and so forth. And he decided, for whatever reason, this guy had heard me preach at a conference, didn't like something that I had to say, and decided he was gonna have me killed. So anyway, so he puts up this street preacher to invite me to Maryland. As I'm about maybe 200 miles away, my cell phone rings, and it's the FBI. Wow. And they're telling me that that this guy wanted to kill me or whatever. And so they said, well, what we want to do is we want to have someone travel with you, because I was traveling around the country a lot at that time. And so we want to have an agent travel with you. And so I agreed to that, given what had just happened. And long story short, the FBI agent, when I met him, was a person who I already knew as the pastor of a small church who I had met at several conferences. At that time, I was circulating pretty heavily in what was known as the Unregistered Baptist Fellowship, which was, basically a group of Baptist churches that were denouncing like the 501c3 and were opposing incorporation of churches and so forth. And so basically, long story short, the FBI obviously had found it necessary to integrate, a fellowship of Baptist churches. So I have no doubt that they were probably very integrated into whatever, activities you were involved in. And, so your story doesn't surprise me at all.
Well, it surprised me. I mean, it shouldn't have surprised me. I mean, I was on their website, this they call themselves the Anti-Racist Action Group here in Chicago, okay? And they had me listed there on their website, and, but I didn't think they would go as far as actually to plan an assassination. But they really considered me. They actually came out here where I live, all right? And they missed me, okay? My wife and I, after we came back from church, it was a nice, summer day. So I decided I wanted to go fishing. So I just loaded up my fishing gear, and we drove away. And these leftists came into the neighborhood, and they started putting all kind of literature out against me, door to door. And then they stood right in front on the driveway, right in front of where I live, okay? And they started blowing their bugles and beating on a tom-tom and chanting all kinds of stuff, And right across the street was a sports bar, and a lot of those guys came out of there, and they seen these guys flying their leftist banners and everything. And they almost had a big riot there. The police were called. From 5 different police departments came there, and the fire department showed up, and the FBI showed up, the Cook County Sheriff's Department showed up, and they were all screaming and hollering at me, and I wasn't even there. And I didn't know anything about it until the next day when the neighbor told me what had happened. I said, oh, my God, it's just incredible. They were out in front of my house screaming and hollering at me and daring me to come out and everything. Wasn't even there. I was home out there fishing on Silver Lake,
Right.
Where I caught a couple of bass, by the way. So, but I thought that was kind of funny and they apparently got run off by these white guys that came out there. They were ready to really mix it up with them, but the police got between them and prevented it. So they haven't come back since. So at least I have somewhat of a safety zone here, except for some vandalism. I had a Mexican, and he was observed breaking a side view mirror off my wife's car. Then he allegedly stumbled up to where my car was parked about 20 yards away in the driveway, okay? And he broke off both of my side view mirrors on my car. Well, some laborers seen what happened. They called the police. They caught this guy. And he said, well, he was a veteran of Iraq and blah, 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 And so I got his name, and I called up his phone number there, got his mother, and she told me that he was a nice boy. And I said, well, nice boy or not, I said, it's going to cost over $500 to repair my car and also another $5 for my wife's car. All right. So I said, either cost up the money or I'm going to press charges and he'd go into jail. He came by and over a period of time, he paid the money back, and I dropped the charge against him because he was a veteran.
Extra, read all about it.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
Extra, read all about it.
These 5 times now that you've said that you've run for Congress, and you're running for Congress at the current moment as well, have you always run as a Republican, or have you ever run as an independent, or?
Well, that's a very good question. Quite frankly, if it was up to me, I wouldn't run as a Republican, and I can't bring myself to ever run as a Democrat. I would like to run as an independent or a third-party candidate, but the way they got the election laws set up here in Illinois, to run as a Democrat, I would need 750 signatures, which means I would be going directly up against the incumbent Democrat Lipinski, which means I'd have to have more than 750 signatures to survive a challenge from him. All right? I'd have to get at least 800 or 900 minimum. To run as a Republican, I needed 603 signatures to get on the ballot, and I filed 850 signatures to survive a challenge, which they did. They tried to knock me off the ballot this time. Had 10 people, 6 of them lawyers, looking at my nomination papers, but they couldn't find enough, to knock me off the ballot. All right. But to run as an independent candidate or a third-party candidate, you're required to get no less than 5,000 signatures minimum just to get on the ballot. And quite frankly, I don't have the energy to go out and get 5,000 signatures on my own, and I don't think any of my supporters would be up to that either. So that's why I've been running as a Republican all the time, because of the damn election laws, pardon my English.
Okay, and so when is the primary?
March 17th, St. Patrick's Day of all things. That's the day I went in the Army in 1969, March 17th, 1969.
Hello, I'm Tom Strain, Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. The Confederate flag, Confederate symbols, and the reputation of our Confederate ancestors has come under attack. The Sons of Confederate Veterans is actively fending off our detractors, but there is only so much that we can do. We need your help. Contact your local, state, and national elected politicians and tell them that you will not tolerate these attacks on our heritage. You can also visit scv.org, download an application to join us in our fight to preserve our Southern heritage. Visit scv.org today. If you don't have a Confederate ancestor and you are tired of American history disappearing, you can assist us by becoming a friend of the SCV. Please visit scvheritagedefense.org and make a donation to the Heritage Defense Fund. We hope that you will join us in the fight to defend the Confederate soldiers' good name.
We are out of time, but we do encourage all of our listeners in the Chicagoland area to make sure that they vote in that March St. Patrick's Day Illinois primary and cast your vote for Art Jones. Also like to encourage you to go to Art's website, arttherebel.com. Go to our website, www.dixiheritage.net. Sign up for our free email newsletter. You'll get it absolutely free of charge. And when you sign up for that, we will also send you a free copy of my book, The Truth About the Confederate Battle Flag. Be sure to tune in to my other show, TBR Radio Presents, the TBR History Hour. Tune in next week, Friday, a week from today, so that you can hear the conclusion of my conversation that we started here today with Art Jones. Art is going to go into detail talking about his platform and just politics in general there and why it's so important that he win that congressional seat.